Ladies and gentlemen, our talk will have three parts. I am going to start, and then I give the floor over to my colleague Katrin, and then I again try to conclude. So we are going to speak about privacy versus security, two values that in a certain sense we all know are very important for us. But even if we say that two values are important, doesn't make it always easy to say how to promote them. They may, as also Matthias Kaiser was pointing in his previous presentation, sometimes conflict. Very often in certain contexts we have to rank these values. We have to make a decision what is more important, and often the question is, how do we know and on what basis we make our decision? We can also describe this kind of decision where we have to choose between two values as sometimes as a moral dilemma, where we have two good values, two important values, and we have to make a decision. Our talk today is not only about weighing different values, but it's also about a certain kind of moral disagreement. And this moral disagreement is between those people who believe that privacy is very important, it has to be protected, even in the cases where national security is threatened, and those who think that forget about privacy. Privacy is dead anyway, and there are situations where privacy cannot be promoted at all because otherwise we can't continue living because security becomes so important. We think that this seems to be like a discourse after 9/11. So it has been like a big kind of move in the discourse about privacy and security in the world, because we think that security is very often hyped, or there is a discourse of threat that is actually influencing this situation. We are not anymore so realistically thinking about how big the threat is, but we are overemphasizing the risk sometimes, and this gives very often also governments a possibility to promote this kind of value so much more that we know as security, and trying to forget about privacy. So this is the background. Mapping the scene. Privacy is an important value, we believe, but there is another value that is called security, which seems to be increasingly in danger. Its defense appears to demand significant curbing of privacy, and some people stress this even more. They say that we have to put all our emphasis on privacy. Very often we hear also that the policymakers saying that our citizens ask us to protect the security. They have given us the floor to decide it, and they are expecting us to secure our security. So privacy has, I quote here Burgess, who in 2008 is saying already that privacy has metamorphosed in these kind of sayings from being the object of security to a very threat to security. And this is the disagreement, that those who think we have to protect privacy and therefore security is important. We heard this, I think, our president yesterday saying our state should, the government should secure privacy in just increasing, making this kind of security important as a public good. But the others are stressing it is a threat to security, get rid of it. Privacy is not so important. Let us do everything in order only to secure our security. There are European precautionary counter-terror security politics, which has impelled numerous initiatives and research projects also on behavior detection technologies. So this is our case study, our more specific example that we are going to look at, not to be only philosophical, but we are going to have to look at certain projects that are developing new technologies which are used for monitoring and managing malintents and abnormal behavior from a distance. And this means the intent is not only to identify known terrorists or criminals, but to catch potential terrorists, to discover crimes before they are committed, planned, or even conceived. So it's a certain kind of reading thoughts strategy that is used. Then we are outlining the problems. What do we believe is the problem about it? We believe that serious ethical concerns are raised by capturing behavior features from distance. And especially in the context of privacy, why it is problematic is that this is done without informing people even about the processing of the data. They even do not know. When you know there are certain cameras which are CCTV cameras, or there are fingerprints taken in airports, you know that data are collected. You don't have a choice in this sense to give a consent for collecting it, but you know this is done. And you can stand for your rights. What is here being endangered is not really privacy alone, and this is our another thought we very much believe, and I think Beate Röster has done it very well also yesterday, saying it, and especially in her book about value of privacy. Privacy supports a range of other values, especially autonomy, but also democracy, trust. And therefore, if privacy is endangered, it's not only that we give up our privacy, we give up our autonomy, we give up our democracy, and this is the basics of our society, which means that these technologies also threaten our society, our liberal democratic society, and we should recognize that privacy is not only as individual right, but it also has a social value. And this is why we are more stressing this social value side, that it's not only privacy is protecting autonomy, but it's protecting our democracy. In democracy, autonomy is flourishing. We're asking in what sort of society we want to live. And if we want to live in a society where we have our autonomy, we have a right for a self-expression, to decide, to know about what's going on, then we, of course, have to protect also this kind of society. So functions of privacy are, as Ruth Gavison has pointed out, it could be very useful to understand the privacy in terms of functions in relation to these two aspects, the individual aspect and society aspect. Beate Röster's book, we take a quote, "Privacy in liberal societies is valued and needed for the sake of individual liberty and autonomy, that is, for the sake of both freedom for each individual to fulfill himself, and thus ultimately for the sake of a life that is rewarding." So it is, privacy is protecting our autonomy, it's in functional relationship. On the other hand, also, we heard yesterday, it has a societal value, and several people have stressed it. From Ruth Gavison's book, we point at that it is precondition for the self-realization of the autonomous individual that is created by the society. We are living in a liberal democracy and a pluralistic society, and only in these societies autonomy can be flourishing. So everyone can live according to his or her chosen model of the good life. So it is our ability to choose, and this has to be promoted, and we can also speak about this kind of choice. So we can discuss it. There are different modes of good life allowed, but we can discuss about, in a deliberative democracy, what kind of measures we even want to choose in order to protect our society, even how to protect security. If this is not anymore there, and somebody is deciding for us that it is good to protect security, and let us take body scanners, let us introduce CCTV cameras or detection technologies without having discussed it with people before, it means our autonomy is violated and our democracy is not functioning anymore. So it threatens our society. So I think what we want to stress is that this value of security is now becoming so important. But it means that it is a little bit unbalanced, and it is decided without us that security is more important than privacy. It is framed, and this is awfully important, that it is framed as a collective good, whereas privacy is often labeled as individual right. And the danger is that seems to be so much easier to give up the individual right than to give up the collective good, because it seems to be as if this is in the interest of everybody. If we are speaking about collective good, then many people are concerned when we are speaking individual liberties, individual right to privacy. This is just your individual choice that you want to have privacy. And exactly therefore, it is very important to stress that privacy is not only an individual right, but it is a social value. And privacy is also a collective good. It's not only individual right, but it is a collective good, it is a common good. And we can have in a society, a good deliberative society, in a democracy, a good discussion about which common good in this context should be more promoted, or even how to try to promote both, how to find a possibility not to give up one just to play it against each other. So our main thesis is here. We think that security as the prime value to be promoted by the state is something that is too easily taken. It is a discourse of threat that is threatening us. Viewing privacy only as a right to individual right in the context of security, as something that is important to us all, creates the distinct risk that privacy will come out the loser in the balance. So remember, if we are only speaking about individual right to privacy, it's easy to play it against or play security against privacy. And our main thesis here, that we want to show in our presentation, is that it's very paradoxical that we are not aware of what we are doing very often. It is paradoxical that we are making decisions to limit privacy in order to protect our society, because we think there is a collective threat, national threat, terrorism or something, and we are introducing measures which actually should ensure security. But in the reality, these means of protection destroy our society. So the way how we are protecting our society actually erodes the same society, undermining its basic values, and it will be impossible to actually protect our democracy in this way. So we think that it is a very good film that is making the point very easily. Team America, World Police, which is directed by Trey Parker in 2004, and just 2 minutes we show the clip that is very absurd what they are doing. I hope it works.
Vabandust, me vajame häält siia, millegipärast see ei tule. Nüüd on jah.
personality question, but we had this.
So I talk about a case we promised to show in order to show how privacy is concerning also other values. There are new emerging technologies called behavior detection technologies that aiming to profile people on the basis of prediction of their actions and behaviors. And the main question is which kind of person one is. And it doesn't mean automatically that person is identified or verified. And this detection is based on automatic interpretation or decision about the person, and resulting in a classification: is the person risky or somehow suspicious. So the decision is made on a basis of predefined indicators of abnormal behavior that justify then placing this person into some category of risky or suspects. These kind of indicators, what they are, for instance, indicate behavior patterns like gait or movement of body, or even biological traits like or states and conditions of a body, like a heat or smell or temperature, changing temperature of body, or visible behavior patterns like rushing through the crowd or loitering, etc. Behavior detection technologies for security purposes are under development and testing. So there are no real live systems as much I know. And there are not many public materials about them. But EU has, for example, initiated some research projects, INDECT and ADAPS. And these projects really has revealed some documents that give us idea about these technologies. So there was a hot debate concerning INDECT project. It was criticized by some European Parliament members. Alvarez was the most critical, and Anonymous group. So in US also similar projects have been introduced. For example, FAST, it's a future attribution screening technology project, which was introducing the modern lie detector for selection those migrants who were more suspicious and who will be interrogated later in more detail. Once we had a presentation about FAST, then I had some materials available on a website of Department of Home Security, but now they are gone, so there is actually maybe one video only in YouTube that is introducing this project. But let's just proceed briefly with these projects. I try to make some conclusions about two projects, just to give an aim of this technology. And main aim is then combat with terrorism and criminal activities, and develop the intelligent systems for automatic detection for abnormal human behavior that may indicate then suspicious activities or specific crimes like bomb attacks or robberies, etc. And first, in these projects, the models of abnormal treat behaviors are then defined. And what are these suspect behaviors? These behaviors are, I mentioned already, rushing through a crowd, such a visible pattern, sitting too long in the airport, and also the forgetting the luggage somewhere. But also more such invisible patterns which indicate the stress, like eye movements or changes in heart rate or body temperature changes. So both projects are aiming creating prototypes of intelligent information system with smart CCTVs with cameras that will assist security operators in the everyday monitoring job. That is quite routine. And by suspicious behavior, then they will be alerted by system and the operator will decide what to do next. And these kind of systems will be used to monitor secure large-scale events, like a football events, public places or some critical infrastructure like airports. So within the project, more complex intelligent system will be developed. Besides suspicious behavior detection, they also identify automatically moving objects and also the subjects. So the concrete persons will be identified and verified. They won't stay anonymous. So what we try to do is to identify the roughly main risks about this technology and find out which values they may concern, mainly privacy and autonomy. And as you see, we think that it attaches also to other values. But I explain more detail what we think, so I go along the features or these risks. The first, forming large databases, a huge amounts of personal data will be processed and collected into databases. Therefore, there are risks of data leakage and access on unauthorized persons, which means overriding the data subjects will about access and use or his or her data. It's a kind of natural risk. Where data, there is also risk for a misuse. So the next one, that these systems are usually integrated to large network-oriented systems that enable to mine and match the data from different sources and make a cross-matchings. In this way, to obtain additional information about the person and use it in other purposes and contexts as initially intended, those result in a function creep, which violates the privacy and autonomy. So massive surveillance, that is more maybe specific to this technology, that and the implementation of this technology intended for a massive surveillance and data surveillance. It means that not only the monitor for a specific suspects, but all people happen to be in public places are under surveillance and scrutiny, so under suspicion. It can be argued, and in one project, ADAPS, it was argued that activities performed in public are explicitly being made public by individual, him or herself, and person would have a choice doing something differently. But we have to admit that these kind of technologies are more powerful than old man-powered systems and bring along new risks. Easy to transfer data from one context to the another, and those cause a function creep. And it concerns also the main central values in functioning democracy. It harms the presumption of innocence, such a principle that is very important, and general trust in society. And interestingly, experts in technical fields, they assert that this kind of technology is not invasive because it does not require the physical contact with person, because they are surveyed without any from distance and covertly. But we find it even more invasive because person maybe not aware of fact that the surveillance and cannot control over the process of processing data. And it becomes more and more difficult in this context. So we think that this kind of practice can cause also a climate of general distrust. Then distant and covered biometrics data capture I already mentioned. Usually intentions that are attributed to the person according to certain kind of behavioral psychological characteristics does some kind of harm. And this is problematic because it violates the person's right to be engaged in self-identification that is core of personal moral autonomy. And it relies on the idea that respect for moral autonomy, we have to take into account this person's aims, evaluations, attitudes, thoughts and desires. But in this case, we see this from third-person perspective, even without attempting to interpret that person's motives, and we try to make judgments about based on just a kind of behavior. And last one, there's with this technology, it's possible to create profiles and profiling. It's one of main points. The behavioral data is resulting is result of profiling in which certain kind of image is created and attached to the person, and then matched against data that can be used to provide even more complete profiles. The main problem with profiling, besides the data protection issues, that it contains kind of stereotypes of possible offender, and this stereotype can inherit content from stereotypes of groups against which there is a popular prejudice, and which is usually not evidence-based. So we think that this technology or surveillance, behavioral surveillance, is a form of social sorting, of categorizing persons and groups and reinforcing existing inequalities. And these categories are seldom subject of ethical inquiry. So I make some conclusive thoughts about this specific case study, that we think that this technology endangers also other values than privacy is protecting. And in a law enforcement and national security area, usually no individual consent is requested. Sometimes people even not informed about processing the data. And there is no tradition to justify in the eyes of public the necessity and social impacts of security measures. So it's a quite non-transparent process. It's of course that requesting individual consent in this context would be not realistic, but what are other options? I think that one option is informing public about implementation, some kind of technology, and processing the data, that the publics would be engaged into the discussion. And this should be happening not when technology is developed and prototyped, but also later where a particular state or private company, whatever, is taking the technology into use and deployment. And what learned from past about the body scanners and biometrics, it can be not equipment for avoiding real consequences or protecting us from real threats, for equipment for deterrence, for show or security theater, in order to show physically who has a power and control. But I think also the trade-off has to not to be a zero-sum game, that security is better than privacy. We can use also less intrusive ways and technical solutions not involving personal data. For instance, it's possible to blur the face on video images for avoiding the person's identification, focus on the detection of objects, not subjects, or delete data immediately, etc. So we have to really think about privacy as design concept. So.
Okay. So what we basically want to remember is that we have to come back to the social dimension of privacy also. That in order to have a right balance or to weigh these values correctly, we have to remember that social privacy is important, and this is also stressing knowledge and consent. And we have here a quote from Alan Weston, a classic in privacy literature, who is perhaps the second sentence very important. If we are switched on without our knowledge or consent, we have in very concrete terms lost our rights to decide when and with whom we speak, publish, worship or associate. So privacy is a social good in democratic societies requiring continuous support from the enlightened publics. And now a few details what can be also said in support of discussing these issues that are implemented and in a certain sense widening the concept of consent. It is understandable, as Katrin said, that the procedure of informed consent as an individual consent may not be implemented in context of security. You can't ask everybody whether they would like to give their biometric details. But this doesn't mean that consent is out of question. In the democratic society, informed consent has two parts, that people are informed about what is taken and they have the option. They can have a choice. Especially important in this context is being informed, having a knowledge, and also to have a choice about the measures that are undertaken. So it's not only that whether I agree to what is done now to me, but it is our democratic society who is deciding which kind of value, which kind of common value is more important, what we call a common value, and what kind of measures are undertaken to protect this common value. So we think that this is exactly the point that is showing that in order to protect privacy, we are protecting also autonomy, but autonomy means these are individual people exercising their autonomy in a certain society. This is all a question about in which society you would like to live. So citizens' autonomy can also be respected not only by individually approaching everyone, would you like to give the biometric details, but we are all citizens in a big society who are also being informed about what kind of options we have. We have to be engaged in public discussions also concerning the benefits and losses accompanying the implementation of a certain new technology, and in decision-making whether or not such technology should be adopted. And I go back here in just one slide, no time to elaborate on it, but those who are interested in political philosophy and what we can learn already from antiquity is that very often it is not understood how autonomy and democracy are actually related to each other. And we think that especially in the case where we are discussing who is defining what is the common value or what is the public interest, Aristotle has very well in his Politics shown that it is very important that the citizens in the Greek polis are exercising their autonomy to engage in the discussion what we call as the public good or what we call as a common good. So deliberation about our collective ends requires practical reason, phronesis in Aristotle's terms, which is developed through self-governance in one's household affairs and through participation in political deliberation. At the heart of politics, according to Aristotle, lies a quest to protect the integrity and political autonomy of each citizen in a political cosmos. We are not only engaged in elaborating what is in our interest, in our individual interest, but we are also governing in self-governance, learning how to engage in the big discussion about what is in the interest of us all. And it's very important that the common good is at least attempted to define in the way where everybody has a say in this discussion, that it's not a group of politicians or a group of businessmen, as in very often in big discussions about implementing technologies or doing measures of security is decided. So what we have to do is to weigh privacy and security, and in some contexts it is necessary to weigh and rank different values, as I said. What we learn from Aristotle is that what is expected from us as citizens is not simple devotion to the common good, so that we promote it, but a reasoned deliberation on the conditions and limits of the common good. The decision should not be made for the citizens, but by the citizens, and this is very important. So, the last slide, what ought to be done? We think while weighing privacy against security, having this kind of weighing or balancing, one should take into consideration also other values. Privacy is related to autonomy, to liberty, to dignity, to trust, to democracy. And the question whether we are giving up our privacy is not only about privacy, it is about a range of other values. Respect people's autonomy. They have to be informed about the surveillance cameras and data collection, at least the knowledge about it, and give them a possibility to get into the discussions what measures can be introduced. And therefore public consent can be, in a certain sense, metaphoric sense, implemented. We protect people's autonomy by allowing them to give this possibility to weigh and rank different values. And what is in the public interest should be defined by the public, not by a small group of policymakers or businessmen. And this is also important, public engagement. Why we let people to get into discussions is that we secure public trust. I think the Estonian society is also learning it now every day. Thank you for your attention and patience. Thanks.
Well, I fully agree with the point made in general and as to INDECT especially. Two additional points of information. You mentioned this is a research sponsored by the European Union as part of the FP7 program. What makes this kind of research problematic is that it doesn't lead to, say, general knowledge. It also leads to something which is very close to being used in practice immediately. We've seen other examples of this, and in some cases it was being applied in airlines and airports even before the report was published. So there is a need to build in some slowdown factor to have the reflection before the research, but also after the research. This is point one. Second, the coordinator of the INDECT program is a Polish university, and this project is now quite controversial, even in Poland. Also in Poland, I should say. What is interesting to inform you about is that the Polish Ministry of Internal Affairs has distanced itself and said, we do not want to be involved with this at all. And that is a piece of information I think is helpful for the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this comment. I totally agree, and I think this was the point that Katrin tried to make, that actually it's very important to think about, to do this kind of ethical analysis or weighing of different values before the project has found out the outcomes and is already implementing. That there may be a too short period before when the technology is worked out, because they then immediately want to introduce it, they want to use it, and this may be too short. From the point of ethical analysis, it has been interesting for me because I'm very often doing ethical review of the European projects in Brussels, and I was looking at what was the ethics review of this project, this concrete project. And we found out that they have a lot of information about what are the ethical aspects of the project, how they are carrying on the research. whereas the part about ethical implications that follow when you use the technology is totally left out. And this is very interesting that when the European Commission is ordering or asking the ethics panels to do the review, it is very often concentrating only on the methodology, but it should take very seriously also the point that is very often left almost empty. What are the ethical implications of this project? Or what are the objectives of the project, which is also important. And I think this shows very well that all these scientific projects are not only ethical issues in the methodology part, but very often the implications come when this comes into real life. Yeah. Does it work? Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. Now, since I totally agree with almost everything you say, I only have a small remark or question. I always get a little nervous when Aristotle's politics is referred to as the paradigm for democratic theory. Because, of course, as you know, the values of autonomy and freedom and liberalism are 18th century values. And Aristotle, as you know, was not a defender of freedom for everybody in the same way. But that's maybe just a historical point. The systematic point is that I think theories in the Enlightenment or recent theories like in Rawls or Habermas make much stronger the link between democratic freedom and individual freedom. So you can't have total individual freedom without, at the same time, having the democratic freedom, because if you don't have the democratic freedom, then there's always a little bit left out of the freedom you could have. Yeah. So then what Habermas calls the co-originality of the two freedoms is so important, because it's only then that you see that autonomy will always be deficient if you're not living in a democracy. And Aristotle didn't go that far.
Okay, it is more very shortly. I don't want to get into big discussions. I agree with this, but I think that the problem really is that the way how the discussion goes in the modern times about defining the common good and understanding what we actually understand and common good, there is much more criticism that this is an illusion that this at all there can be an agreement about it. And I think why we are using Aristotle is that I think he makes a very clear example of showing actually how the ability to be able to get into the defining of the common good is dependent on our ability to get into self-governance and to be able to stand up as a citizen. I agree that he has a certain citizen in mind, of course, that it's not the democracy in the sense of today's liberal societies, but it's just a specific point then. Thank you.
I just want to have a little footnote, because I also, as the other speakers here, agree with what you say. The footnote is this. I mean, I perceived your talk as basically a defense for privacy in competition with the security claim. Now, another line is also to be a little bit more on the offensive against the security. And I think you have been indicating this in your very first line. You said that after 9/11 we have seen something that, I don't know if you used the term, like a hype on security. And I think this underscores some of the points that have been made here earlier about the contextuality of certain values. And security is definitely one of those, because in this area it came up in this form as a hype, you know. Actually, as far as we know, with very low probabilities of real damage, I mean, to large numbers being done. The same issue, security, has a very low priority in other areas. If you look at, for example, issues like food security on a global scale, all of a sudden it is much further down the priority scales in all our political agendas. Food security, the global food security, we have a lot of knowledge that this will be threatened in coming times. On the other hand, it doesn't make it up. So contextualizing these values on, who is furthering this, who is feeling threatened by that, and why is that all of a sudden coming up, and who's making, whose interests are we serving is, I think, an important issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is no disagreement in the sense, because we think that context is very important, and we mentioned this issue. The question is that we had no time to do it, but we have done it in a written text, that it's the proportionality question, that how big the risk is, how is the assessment done, and I think the real danger is why we are now protecting privacy. We are not it's not like prima facie saying privacy is more important. It's a reaction when privacy is played down that you try to defend it. And I think the real danger is that the governments are using it not really because they understand on the factual basis that the risk is big, but they still have an interest to have power and to control. And I think here we are back where we had a discussion yesterday, what should be the government's role, and should we hope that they are securing, that every government is securing our thing. And this is also where I disagree with our president, that I think when he's saying that this is out, the big brother watching us is not anymore a topic, I don't think it is the case. I mean, it is still a topic that is also very important. It's not only big players on internet who are threatening us. There is still a tendency that it is like what we know from totalitarian societies, that governments try to get more and more power, have to control over it, without actually having evidence for that this big threat is there. Sorry for being here.
Thank you again, I'm sorry.